we can calculate the chance or probability of an event occurring as a fraction, percentage, or a decimal. To be able to do that, we're going to use a formula. The first way that we could write this formula is the probability of an event, which is what the P bracket E stands for, equals the number of favourable or desired outcomes divided by the total number of possible outcomes. Or, written in just a different way but pretty much represents the same thing, is the probability of an event equals the number of ways the event happens divided by the number of ways all events can happen. So as you can see, if we had to calculate this, we'll get either a fraction, right? So we could get something like 3/6, or it can then be calculated even further into a decimal, which is 0.5. So as you can see here, these can also be written as a ratio, which we've just done, so desired to possible, so 3/6, or like we just went through, it can be a fraction, so 3 divided by 6, and if we divide by 6, it's 0.5, and that's the probability of an event occurring. We can also do that as a percentage, and if you remember from our percentage lessons, all we've got to do is multiply by 100, and that will give us 50%. So it's 50% likely that a certain event could happen. Let's go through an example. What is the probability of landing on a 4 if we look at the spinner here? So we're going to use our formula. So the probability of the event equals, there is only one way to land on the 4 because there's only one 4 on our spinner here, whereas we're going to do the total of all events that can happen as our denominator. So how many events do we have? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got a total number of 4 events that could possibly happen. But we only have one 4 that we can land on. So the probability of the event happening of landing on a 4 is 1/4. So a quarter. If we had to do that as a decimal, we would write it as, or we calculate it as 1 divided by 4, which gives me a decimal of 0.25. And if I want it as a percentage, I'm going to multiply that by 100, and that's going to give me 25%. The second question asks, what is the probability of rolling a 6 when using a dice? So we know that there is only one 6 on a dice. So we've got a 1 at the top. The total possible outcomes on a dice is 6 because there are 6 faces on a dice. So the probability of rolling a 6 is 1/6. In this example, it asks, what is the probability that the spinner will stop on B? So the first thing that we're going to look at is what are the favourable outcomes. So favourable means we want it to actually land on B. That's what we're asking for. So how many times does B occur in our spinner? There's 1 here, 2 here, and 3. So B can actually be landed on 3 times because there are 3 Bs in our spinner. The second thing that we've got to look at is the total number of outcomes, because when we spin this, it could land on any one of the outcomes here. So how many have we got all together? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got 8 all together. Now all we're going to do is write that as a fraction. So the probability of the event of landing on B equals our favourable divided by our total, which is 3/8. Now, to calculate this as a percentage, what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 divided by 8, which will give me 0.375, and then I'm going to multiply that by 100 to get a percentage, and that will give me 37.5%. So when we're looking at a probability of something, we've got to look at the favourable outcome. So what do you want, or what are you looking for to happen? We're going to then look at the total possible outcomes that could happen within that event or experiment. And then we're going to write it as either a fraction, decimal, or percentage, depending on what the question asks you. Let's look at one last example. It says a jar of lollies contains 5 red, 3 green, 6 yellow and 2 blue lollies. Taylor selects one lolly from a jar at random and notes its colour. Calculate the probability of each. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at the total, and we did that in our previous video. And all we're going to do is add up all the possible lollies that we could get. So there's 5 red ones, 3 green ones, 6 yellow and 2 blue. So the total number of lollies that are in this jar equals 16. So that's going to be our denominator for all our probability calculations. The next thing is to look at all the favourable outcomes. So to pick a red, you could possibly pick that 5 times because there are 5 red lollies. A favourable for green would be 3 because there's 3 green lollies. For yellow, it is 6. And for blue, it is 2. So what we're going to do now is work out the probability of picking a red. So if you remember, we do favourable over total. So favourable for red is 5 and the total is 16. For green, we're going to put our favourable, which is 3, and our total is 16. For yellow, our favourable is 6 and our total is 16. And lastly, blue, which is 2 over 16. Now you can always convert these to decimals or percentages depending on the question and what the question asks. But when we're calculating probability, we're looking at our favourable outcomes divided by our total. And again, you may need to convert that to a decimal or a percentage.